what we owe each other, involuntary particular obligations. We have already touched on looking at should statements as statements about expectations. So, for instance, if there is a general expectation that employers should pay their employees what has been agreed to and that employees should perform the task assigned to them. Obligations are a common way to analyze ethics. One can look at them this way: that which is ethically permissible, that which is ethically required, and that which is ethically forbidden. Obligations, otherwise called duties, in turn can be divided as natural and voluntary. Natural duties are universal, and we have no choice in the matter. Voluntary obligations are particular and require some buy-in. Now, think of the past ethical theories that we've looked at, excluding virtue theory for the time being. What sort of duties or obligations can we detect? In utilitarianism, we have an obligation to work towards the general welfare. It is a general obligation or duty. In libertarianism, we have an obligation to respect the property of others. For Kant, there is the categorical imperative, and with Rawls, we have a duty to respect the liberty and interest of others. These would all be seen as natural duties. Notice that in each case they are universal, and as such do not require that we consent to them. They are givens, whether we like them or not. Contrast this with voluntary duties. A utilitarian is not obliged to make any particular person happy. Libertarians are not obliged to dispose of their property in any particular way unless they agree to it. The entire idea of a hypothetical imperative for Kant is that it is conditional, and Rawls makes a similar distinction between hypothetical contracts, which are universal and do not require assent, and actual contracts, which are particular and do require consent. Natural duties are universal and do not require consent. Voluntary duties are particular and do require consent. In each of the theories we've examined today, again, excluding virtue theory, this list is comprehensive and exclusive. But Sundell asks, is that really true? There are many instances, for instance, where officials or even individuals have apologized for the actions of people now long dead. There have been made apologies for the Japanese internment camps of World War II, the Holocaust, the treatment of Native Americans, of the treatment of Native peoples in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. There have been apologies made by the descendants of slave owners and institutions such as colleges, universities, and churches that participated and benefited from slavery. There is currently a debate whether there is a need to apologize for racism, but should we feel any obligation to do so? For instance, it can be asserted that we don't apologize for people separated from us in space. Why should we do so in time? Moreover, we are only responsible, so they say, for our actions or those with whom we voluntarily associate. We cannot apologize for that which we hold no personal responsibility. Do you see a pattern or trend between these various contract theories? What word is common between Locke and Rawls? What word in Kant would seem to tie these two together? The individual, the self, is key to each of these contract theories. Each succeeding theory gains specificity for the role of the individual, with society at large relegated to simply making room for the rights of the individual. Each succeeding theory gives the individual greater self-determination. Locke provides the notion of consent, but leaves the extent of individual autonomy undefined. Kant extends things somewhat by emphasizing choice over inclination, but still, choice is bound by moral law. Rawls takes autonomy even further, since moral law becomes a construct that supports individual interests. It is most evident in Rawls' insistence that teleologically based ethics proceeds on the wrong foot, as would be the case, as justice is simply a matter of securing individual liberty. For Rawls, the fair must define the good. By way of review, Locke, Kant, Rawls, utilitarians, and libertarians essentially flipped the script that Aristotle had initially set up. It was Aristotle's contention that it was necessary to decide what something was good for, then to deliberate on the best means to secure that good. Contract theorists, such as Locke and Rawls, would immediately point out the danger of this approach. Recalling Aristotle's defense of slavery, it is far too easy to find ad hoc arguments to support injustice based on some prior good. Aristotle's flawed sexist, classist, and ethnocentric arguments become positively pernicious when extended in the imagination of race. On the other hand, as Sandel argued earlier, there are many issues of justice that cannot be decided simply on the basis of fairness. Sandel proposes that we improve on Aristotle without overturning his ideas, however. The $10 word from last time was eudaimonia, well-being, human flourishing, happiness. Aristotle locates eudaimonia in our being rational beings. Think back to the crash course philosophy critique of Kant's categorical imperative. That is the thought bubble, involving the young man caught between going to war for his country and caring for his aged parent. Like Kant, Aristotle wanted to ground ethics in rationality. Setting aside the difference of how they view reason, both have in common that reason alone ought to settle on one and only one outcome. Otherwise, the decision cannot be made by rational deliberation. However, it is evident that there is not always just one best outcome or one best distribution of goods or even one best set of goods. Alasdair MacIntyre came up with an interesting extension of Aristotle. It is MacIntyre's contention that human beings are meaning makers. However, meaning is always found within a larger context. He uses the analogy of storytelling. One comes to sympathize with a protagonist at one particular part of the story because of what has gone on before and where the story is going, or at least seems to go. In the same way, where we grew up, who our parents are, what our experiences are, the mores of our community, all provide an initial meaning for our lives, which we in turn shape. If justice is not found by starting with individual liberty, then the particularities of our social situation must also entail obligations. So while particular, like voluntary obligations, they are also such that they do not require consent, like universal obligations. Sandel calls these obligations of solidarity. These would include obligations to one's family, friends, community, and country. There was a Calvin and Hobbes strip where Calvin complains to his father about his allowance. His father comes back to outline just how much it takes to raise a child and then asks, "Do you want to consider this a gift or a loan?" In reality, parents actually feel, or at least should feel, an obligation to give their children the best opportunities they can. One can see the same thing for communities. In the recent wildfire in Maui, the community came together to rebuild or help their neighbors. It isn't just that they thought it was a good thing, they felt duty bound to do so. It isn't just those within a community that have obligations of solidarity. Communities that have been devastated in the past, such as in Paradise, California, feel a special connection to the recent wildfire, and because of this connection, felt a cheerful duty to help. Members of a community, as a community, feel that they have a duty to other communities with whom they have a connection. Sandel provides examples that encompass an entire spectrum of duties of solidarity. This, then, is an answer for why we can or should feel an obligation to apologize on behalf of those who came before us, to make amends, even if we personally have never participated in their transgressions, namely, solidarity with those who came before us, a solidarity with our larger communities and institutions which existed in the past as they exist today. So, if there are particular and contingent obligations that we are born into, then meaning and liberty are not hierarchically related, but bound in a deliberate push and pull. Justice is not simply the fair distribution of what we value, but a quest to determine what is of value in the first place.